I think we'll get started. I'm Theresa Linz, and I'm one of the multi-site project managers in ICTR. And me, along with my colleague, Moellner, are going to present Mastering Multi-Site Clinical Trials, Strategies, Challenges, and Best Practices. I want to just give you a little disclaimer with this presentation. These aren't all the steps in a multi-site trial, but these are some areas that we really wanted to emphasize and make sure you had information on, because they're areas that either we or others we know have encountered hiccups when doing multi-site studies. Also, I wanted to let you know we have a representative from the IRB joining us today, and we're going to stop about midway through because we're going to talk about IRB components of multi-site trials, and we're going to have time for questions at that point. Okay, so just looking at what we're going to present today, we're going to give you an introduction to multi-site trials, talk about planning for your trial, talk through the operational setup, give you information about clinical research networks, training opportunities, and then finally let you know about what ICTR multi-site resources are available. But we're going to just find out a little bit more about you and who's in the audience. That's awesome. All right, so it looks like site activation and startup is like the top concern. And then contracts and budgets and communication and recruitment and retention. So the good news is we are going to cover all of these today. So thanks for participating in the poll. See if I can start with our intro. Okay. And the other thing I want to mention is you are going to get these slides afterwards. Some of the slides are kind of wordy, but it's key information we wanted you to have. So you can review the slides after I send those out. But I wanted to make sure I defined what a multi-site trial is. So a multi-site trial, according to NIH, involves the implementation of the same clinical protocol at 2 or more independent investigational sites where the participants are seen for an intervention and/or outcomes assessment. In a multi-site trial, the investigational sites are typically administrative or corporately distinct from each other. So that is a really key phrase there. Whereas a single-site clinical trial utilizes one investigational site to conduct and coordinate the protocol, while a single-site clinical trial may enroll participants from multiple locations. Those participants will receive an intervention or undergo outcome assessment under the direction and oversight of one research team located at one investigational site. So I hope that helps you understand just what we mean when we say a multi-site trial. So why do people want to conduct multi-site trials? Here are like 4 main reasons and 4 main benefits. It leads to increased generalizability. Findings are more widely applicable because you have multiple regions, various demographics, and clinical environments that are included. Hopefully, it leads to faster recruitment because you'll have access to a larger participant pool, quicker enrollment, and especially for rare or low prevalence conditions. Shorter study timelines. Multiple sites recruiting and collecting uniform data in parallel can reduce the overall study duration. And risk mitigation. For example, if one site encounters delays, such as from the IRB or staffing issues or contracts, other sites can maintain the study progress and keep on going. And I'm going to go through and define a number of terms that you will encounter when you're doing a multi-site study. So like I said, a multi-site is the same research procedure from the same protocol being conducted at more than one site. And then, oops, go back, sorry about that. The lead team is responsible for the overall study of all the sites. And then the lead site is responsible for enrolling participants at the same institution as the lead team. Sometimes these are the same, but sometimes these are very different groups. So just keep that in mind. With the lead team, this usually includes the study principal investigator, the project manager, the regulatory manager. the data manager and the biostatistician, etc. Whereas the lead site will also have the study coordinators. And sometimes the study PI may decide that they are too busy and they will also have a site PI at the lead site. So also an option. And then there's the clinical coordinating center, and this group is responsible for managing study operations across all the sites. And so sometimes this could be at the same institution as the lead team, but not necessarily. This could also be a commercial or industry-based entity. And some more terms that I wanted to make sure you're aware of. So data coordinating center. It's a different group that handles specific data, including the electronic data capture build and queries. It could be at the same institution as the lead team, but not necessarily. And again, this could be a commercial or industry-based organization that you just hire privately. There are also contract research organizations, most often used with standard industry-sponsored studies, but other studies could contract pieces of management or oversight. So some examples of CROs are IQVIA, ICON, MedPace, and PPD. Then there is the participating site. These are the sites where the research procedures happen, and including recruitment, enrollment, intervention, and the data collection. The study principal investigator, this is the individual with the overall responsibility for the entire study across all sites and participants. Whereas the site principal investigator is the person with responsibility for the conduct of the study at just a single site. So here's some challenges that we've identified with multi-sites that come up. And we will be talking through how to deal with some of these challenges later on in the presentation. But regulatory and startup, as was evidenced in the poll, you have multiple IRBs, and they have differing local requirements, variable review timelines, and complex reliance agreements. There's also contracting and budget. Sometimes there's lengthy contracting and negotiation processes. There are various budget needs across the site, and there's limited funding for adequate staffing or infrastructure. Operational resource limitations. There's limited staff, space, and resources. There are competing priorities for site staff and PIs, and then there's high turnover or workloads that impact the operations of a trial. Some other challenges are coordination and training. There are high coordination needs across many teams, and it's time intensive to onboard and provide refresher training when you have new staff. And then there's recruitment and site variability. Enrollment or retention varies by site, sometimes a lot. Underperforming sites require additional support. Site level differences in workflow and patient population. And then quality assurance and monitoring complexity. You need to ensure that you have consistent screening, treatment, and follow-up. Increased monitoring needs due to multiple locations. And you will require a strong, well-resourced coordinating center to maintain oversight for a multi-site trial. Let's look at how to plan for those multi-site trials to try and set yourself up for success. So the first part of planning is when you're developing the protocol. So you want to make sure that this study is feasible across all your selected sites. It must fit the different workflows, staffing levels, and resources. Also, make sure you have clear, standardized procedures included in the protocol. Detailed instructions will reduce the site-to-site variation. Built-in flexibility where appropriate. Allow some reasonable adaptation for site-specific practices without compromising data integrity. Make sure you have defined roles and responsibilities. Clarify which tasks belong to the lead PI, the site PIs, the coordinating center, and the data teams. And then detailed operational guidance. Include visit schedules, assessments, timing windows, and handling of deviations. And considerations for site activation timing. Protocol should support staggered startup and enrollment to ensure each site receives the appropriate attention, support, and including time for troubleshooting. So our best practices that we're going to offer to you are engage sites early to confirm protocol feasibility. Spend time operationalizing the study, like work through each step at your site to make sure you know what's all needed and who's all needed. And then build timelines with sufficient buffers in case some sites have delays in starting up or completing study interventions. So again, when you want to do site selection and feasibility, approach the sites early. Assess the site feasibility to ensure that there is adequate local site capacity to support research projects, including making sure they have a sufficient patient population, checking that they aren't dealing with any other competing studies, making sure that their personnel are qualified to conduct the study, make sure that they have sufficient staff, space, and facilities, checked that they have availability of other key services like a clinical research unit, investigational pharmacy, etc. A best practice would be to use a standardized feasibility questionnaire and EHR query. So UW now has the new University Health SMPH Research Operations Committee, or UROC, and this reviews proposed studies for feasibility. They want to look at studies that involve UW services, personnel, facilities, or UW Health patients, and just to make sure that they can operationalize the study. Study teams with studies meeting these criteria are required to submit to UROC according to their posted meeting cycle. And if you click on the link in the slide, you will be taken to more information about UROC. Submission to the IRB should occur after you've had your UROC review. And then again, if you click on this link, there are more answers with the UROC FAQs. Also, plan to work with Ictor Informatics to develop an EHR query for sites. Informatics can assist the investigators in developing an EHR query to use during project development and grant submission. Send queries to sites to determine if the patient population is sufficient, which is really key. And then we have a link here to the informatics consult request form. Okay, and then there are a number of budget considerations when you're planning for your multi-site study. So in terms of personnel, pay for coordinator time instead of coordinator FTE to preserve the budget if recruitment is slow. Never underestimate the time and number of sites it will take to recruit. If your budget agrees to pay for 1.0 FTE or of a coordinator for 3 years and the study ends up taking 5 years to recruit, there will be no money left to pay coordinators in years 4 and 5. But if the budget agrees to pay for the time it takes study coordinators to complete various tasks, there will be money left over, even if the recruitment takes longer than anticipated. Also consider paying per screen or per enrollee to incentivize site performance. Think about the cost of study interventions and the procedures. So determine the number of active and/or placebo doses that you need. Plan for some product loss due to expiration, and also think about the shipping costs of shipping that product out to sites. Determine what is standard of care versus research. Also factor in administrative costs. There are IRB fees, site startup, closeout, institutional fees, or indirect cost. Also think about the cost of statistical analysis and data management. Costs can vary greatly on whether tasks are performed internally by lead site staff or outsourced. There's also the cost of the clinical trial management system that can vary greatly. You may want to budget in travel for site initiation and monitoring visits. Though I will point out that since COVID, travel may not be as large of a cost as it was in the past because some studies just prefer to use remote visits for site initiation visits or for monitoring. Also think about including money in the budget in case you need to scale up. Your study might start out as a single site, but then need to scale up for additional sites. And if you do that, you need to be aware that it's not a one-to-one ratio in terms of work and budget needs. You need to think carefully about how you will operationalize going from a single site to a multi-site and what needs to be changed in the procedure of data collection to allow for additional sites. So some best practices for the budget are: do not put multi-site grant research into the budget without budgeting positions that are solely devoted to site management, or at least some significant percentage of time. A coordinator should not be expected to project manage. The coordinator also should not be expected to manage regulatory, like the IRB application or documents. Local recruitment and participant activity is a full-time job, so do not expect your coordinator to do that job also in addition to these other two full-time jobs. Have an actual budget spreadsheet with all line items included, including staff time, internal charges or fees, any purchases. Just make sure you include all of it when you're planning out your budget. And each item should come from an actual source of money, either future or current. And now we're going to look at some terms for the IRB, and I'm going to define some different IRB-related terms just specifically for multi-sites. So a single IRB review is required for all multi-site studies with funding from federal agencies, primarily, especially NIH. There is some NIH nuance. Only non-exempt human subjects research with multiple sites that are conducting with the same protocol and procedure need a single IRB review. A single IRB and a central IRB are essentially interchangeable, but there are some key differences. A single IRB generally is only used when referring to an IRB that is reviewing one study, whereas a central IRB generally is only used when referring to an IRB that reviews a consistent group of studies. An example of this is the National Cancer Institute's central IRB that reviews all phase 3 adult cooperative group studies. The IRB of record is the IRB that is reviewing the study for all sites. The reviewing IRB is reviewing the study for all sites, and this is a SMART IRB term of choice, along with the relying IRB. The relying IRB is each of the site's IRBs that has ceded review to a single IRB, again from the SMART IRB. As we said, as of January 20th, 2020, single IRB review must be used for any federally funded non-exempt multi-site research study. The goal of this is to enhance and streamline the IRB review process so that multi-sites can proceed as efficiently and effectively as possible. The shift in workload away from conducting redundant reviews is also expected to allow IRBs to conduct more time and attention on the the review of single site protocols, thereby enhancing research oversight. And at UW, we have the Reliance and Navigation team, or the Reliant team, and they support multi-sites by coordinating single IRB reviews, ceded reviews, and external personnel. They help by facilitating reliance agreements and assisting teams working through commercial IRBs or with the NCI IRB. And they help by guiding study teams through institutional requirements outside the IRB process. So we have contact information for the Reliant team here, and also a link to their consult form. And we'll talk a little bit about when you should reach out to them. And this is just a screenshot of the Reliance manual that you can find online. It's a great resource to get some basic information about the different aspects of the Reliance process, both when UW is serving as the IRB or ceding review to another IRB. In terms of Reliance agreements, they allow UW to serve as the IRB for another institution and or external individuals, or to cede review of a study to another IRB. The Reliant team handles all agreements, requests, and assists the study team in completing Reliance documentation, such as by obtaining any required signatures for agreements and filling out local context forms. The timeline for getting Reliance agreements completed varies, but the most important factor is communication. Reliance agreements can be completed faster when both the reviewing site IRB and the relying site IRB have good communication from their local study teams, and the study teams also have good communication with each other. And here's just a nice graphic showing the needed communication flow for the different entities. And so keep in mind, the Reliance process can take time since other site study teams and HRPPs are involved. So good communication is the key. And some considerations when working with the IRB. If UW-Madison will be the single IRB for a study, make sure you are in contact with the Reliant team, as they can advise on the IRB process for multi-site studies, and they will be responsible for completing the Reliance process with all your collaborators. If UW will be ceding review of a study, please use the cede application and arrow. If you have any questions on that process, please reach out to the Reliant team. Keep in mind that single IRB review is required for federally funded non-exempt research, but we can also use Reliance agreements in other scenarios. We often use Reliance agreements for non-federally funded, non-exempt multi-site research. So please reach out if you want to discuss your Reliance options. Also note that UW-Madison does not serve a single IRB or cede review for exempt studies. We would require a local exemption application. IRB reporting requirements may vary depending on the IRB of record. Include IRB reporting requirements in the study protocol so they are easily accessible by the study teams. And a best practice that we recommend is develop a regulatory packet to aid sites in moving through IRB approvals. Okay, I'm going to just pause for a minute and see if there are questions. Again, the IRB representative is on the meeting today, so if you have specific IRB Reliant questions, she's happy to help too.
Go ahead, Rebecca. Hillary's on the call with us.
Oh, great. Hi, Allie, and thanks, everyone. This is fantastic. Allie, you might have a unique perspective on this. Our team consistently struggles with making determinations about single or multi-site sometimes, particularly when it comes to relationships with our subcontractors, a community-based agency that Allie, you know, is Vivint Health. We consistently use UW-Madison as our single IRB. It's one protocol. There are staff that are hired by that community partner who then they are performing research activities on our behalf. Am I correct in thinking this is likely multi-site research?
Hillary, do you have thoughts on this? I was part of this team, so I have some thoughts, but curious if anyone else.
Yeah, so if UW-Madison is serving as the single IRB, we would look to see if those community partners are engaged in human subjects research, which would then require them to have some kind of IRB coverage. Sometimes community partners that research teams work with do research activities that don't really engage them in the human subjects part of research, which means they wouldn't need IRB coverage and we wouldn't have to list them on an application. Oftentimes, though, if they're doing research activities that interact with participants in some way, or, especially if for some reason they're ever consenting a participant, which is not likely with like community study team members, but consenting or, um, you know, delivering any kind of intervention with the participants, they're normally going to be engaged. And that would be the point where we would say we do need IRB coverage. And if we're serving as an IRB in that situation, we would look to have some kind of agreement, whether it's an individual reliance agreement or, I think for sometimes if it's like an organization and they have multiple people involved in the research, we would set up, an agreement with that organization itself.
Okay, are there any other questions, Allie?
Oh, I was just going to say, Rebecca,
Yeah.
that just brought me back to the IRB application. I just remember going through and kind of thinking out like the multi-site, some of the questions in there a while back. And yeah, that was an interesting dilemma and trying how to figure out how to categorize because our community partner were consenting, we're doing some of the interventions. So I think it was kind of unique and wasn't as straightforward as I thought initially. So. Theresa, do you want me to read? There is one question.
Okay, just open the chat. Is the startup period part of the budget?
Yeah, I
Yes.
can just say that out as well. I mean, when we're developing a budget for this kind of trial, and thanks for letting me be here, do we put this regulatory work, the IRBs and startup period as part of our initial budget and proposal timeline that in the first 6 months to a year we're going to do this? Or is this all pre-work that we do prior to applying for our funding?
I would say you would include it in the budget. So when I'm thinking about study startup, you still have to have prep meetings with the study staff long before you initiate the actual study and do the enrollment and recruitment. So I would say, yeah, you would include money in the budget for some of that staff time and such. Allie, do you have any other insights on that?
Apologies, I was answering back to the
Oh,
chat.
sorry. Yeah, I guess that's where I leave it, but we can talk offline some more, Nabil, if you'd like, if you want to dive into that a little bit further. Just to keep us on track time-wise, I'm going to turn this back over to my colleague, Allie Moellner, if you're ready, Allie.
Yeah, I was just reading Julia's comment as well in the chat, so hopefully that helps too.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to be taking over for the second half. So I'm Allie Moellner. I'm another multi-site project manager in ICTR. So I'm going to be talking about operational setup next. So if Theresa, go to the next slide. Okay, so Theresa kind of mentioned this in the protocol development section, but it's really, really pressing and important that we define roles and responsibilities of our team members and share that out with all study staff, and especially doing that from the start. This can prevent missed or duplicate work when people don't quite know who is taking on what aspect of the study, especially if you have like a clinical coordinating center versus the lead study site or study team. Sometimes duties might overlap, so it's really important that you're kind of hashing that out early on. So you can list that information out in your key personnel section in your protocol, but you can also list this out in your manual of procedures or a MOP or an MOP. It's kind of called different things depending what you would like, but basically, a MOP is a detailed study-specific document that operationalizes the clinical trial protocol by providing step-by-step instructions, standardized procedures, operational guidance for all participating sites. So it's a single document. It's typically rather big, But it really ensures that the protocol is implemented the same at all your study sites. It's kind of the go-to document for your coordinators and study team members who are implementing your trial. And then also a best practice around roles and responsibilities is to create a roles and responsibilities matrix and share that with your team members too. If Theresa, if you want to go to the next page. So here's an example of one way you can do sort out your roles and responsibilities amongst your team members. This is called a RACI matrix. This is just a small little example that we put together. Yours might look very different, especially this only has 4 different jobs or staff members on it. So sometimes they look a little bigger with only a handful of activities, but basically you make this in Excel. If you Google RACI matrix, you'll find a bunch of examples and probably templates out there. But basically what you're doing is you're organizing a table by person and by activity, and then you're going to be giving them an R, an A, or a C to go with responsible, accountable, consult, or inform. And just if it's helpful, I can kind of give you an idea of what each of these items represents. So R is for responsible. It's the people who actually do the work and make the decisions. There can be multiple people as a responsible party for an activity. Accountable, the A, is the person who owns or has oversight of the work and its outcomes. They might approve or sign off when the task is complete, and there should only be one accountable person per task. Consultants, probably pretty obvious to you, but these are individuals who provide input before the work is completed. They're an active participant in the process, and there's usually two-way communication with these members. And then informed, also probably pretty obvious, but individuals who need to be kept up to date on the progress and on decisions. They don't need to provide input or directly contribute to the task. They just need to be updated or notified about progress and changes. So this is just one way, excuse me, losing my voice, that you can kind of sort out your roles and responsibilities. Sorry, Theresa, you're good to go to the next. So kind of related to roles and responsibilities, this is kind of a typical list of staffing considerations and staff and team members that you might have on the lead site or the lead study team. And these are the people that you should definitely be including in your roles and responsibility matrix if you're using a RACI or some other kind of matrix, but it's really important that you're defining these jobs. And then you might, depending on your study type, you might have some additional groups such as like clinicians, you might have research nurses, pharmacy and lab team members that you need to input into this, or, departmental admin or other departmental team members. So definitely varies by site, but this is kind of an idea of the typical, of some typical roles and responsibilities. So you're good to go to the next. Okay, so this probably isn't a surprise to those that have done multi-site clinical trials or maybe who have not done multi-site clinical trials, but single-site investigator-initiated research versus multi-site investigator-initiated research can add a lot more balls to juggle, or in this instance, things to balance for Cat in the Hat. Theresa, if you just want to go to the next one. Related to PIs, the main thing I think I want to stress here is, you're adding more staff, you're adding more sites to your trial, you're adding a lot more versus a single site. But what comes along also with multi-site research and PI responsibilities is that the PI of the multi-site investigator-initiated trial also takes on the role of sponsor investigator as well. And with that, you have some extra duties on top of your, typical PI duties. So I'm not going to go through all these, but some of them I think are listed here. You can reference that number and kind of find a little bit more out about that. But just wanted to note that if you are a PI, you are taking on that sponsor investigator position as well. Okay. So something else that's a little bit more unique with the multi-site trials is how you're doing study training. So oftentimes your lead study team or your clinical coordinating center kind of takes on creating and performing trainings for the teams. So as I mentioned, that manual of procedures is really important. It gives, the step-by-step information that sites need to execute your trial. You might need a pharmacy manual depending on what your intervention or your trial is doing. And then also you want to have standardized case report forms for all sites. It's really important when you're kind of building these out that you have other team members take a look at them to make sure you're not missing steps, that things are written correctly, make sure that you're using plain language where you can to better explain steps as simple as they can be. And then also utilize your subject matter experts. When I'm writing MOPS, I do not have a lab background. So I make sure to include our lab team members to make sure that what I'm saying, the steps make sense, that we're not missing steps, that I'm not undersimplifying something. So make sure that you're tapping in to your whole study team to make sure you're not missing vital, important things, and then also that the instructions are clear. You'll also want to track your required trainings and license for all the personnel across all the sites. So this could be your city training, it could be license and credentials, CVs, any kind of trainings that your trial might require. And a best practice is just to have an Excel form with multiple different tabs per site. So this would be your training directory where you can easily access it to find, to make sure no one's city training is lapsing or no license or credentials are lapsing. Because one of the worst things is having to pause a site because you need to redo your city training or something like that, and you're not able to continue working on the trial. Yeah, I think, Theresa, you're good to go to the next one. Okay, so site initiation visits are also something you'll need to do before sites are able to enroll. And you might be doing this for single site studies, but for multi-site, they're just a little bit different, and you need to really adapt to the different sites. So Theresa mentioned that historically these were typically done in person, but since COVID, a lot of these are being done virtually, and that's totally okay. Oftentimes your study monitors or your clinical coordinating center, the lead site or the PI will be facilitating these. And then all essential staff per site need to be joining these SIV calls. So sometimes scheduling can be kind of rough, but it's really vital that you get everyone from the team together to review the information that needs to be discussed. And you'll have separate SIVs for each site. Typically, these are done after the site receives IRB approval, but before they're starting to enroll any participants. And SIVs are pretty much a readiness check. You're ensuring that all the staff are trained. You're confirming that they're ready to operationalize your protocol, and that they're ready to enroll participants pretty much immediately after that SIV training, unless there's anything that they need to complete prior to that. As I mentioned, SIVs should really be tailored to your site. It's not a one size fits all. You'll need to consider that site's staffing structure, their pharmacy or lab or clinic workflows. All of our health systems sometimes function very differently. So you need to make sure you're taking that into account with the SIV and any local challenges. Theresa and I were on a study where one of the sites had to drive a mile to go get the vaccine for the trial to bring it to the clinic. So you just have to kind of keep those in mind and make sure you're discussing those as well. Also, SIVs can potentially catch operational barriers or other issues, but it's really important that you're working through those in the protocol development and having that early communication with the sites to kind of prevent that from having to happen at the SIV. Sometimes at the SIV, you get to dig into a little bit more of the operations, so there might be things that pop up, but it's best to really think through a lot of the challenges and barriers during the protocol development and early phases, or else you might need to go back to the IRB and have us submit a change of protocol or something like that. So can catch operational issues, but best to kind of think through that early on. And then there's a list of items that you should consider in your SIV, but there might be additional items. And if you ever have questions about SIVs, sorry, I've said that word like 20 times, I think. You feel free to reach out to Theresa and I. We've done a number of these, and we can kind of give you a template just to get started with and help you kind of think about how you need to adapt it. Okay, enough with SIVs, Theresa. You're good to go. Next one. Okay, so staff turnover. Doing a multi-site study, you're obviously having a lot more team members, and with that, you're likely to have staff turnover. It's something that just happens with multi-site trials. I've been the staff turnover before, so it's something that you should anticipate, but be proactive and kind of think about how you can mitigate having to train new new team members. So focus on building systems and not relying on a single individual at a site to be the knowledge base of the entire study. I think we often do this with our jobs in general. So just make sure that you're focusing on the systems and writing that information down. You should be maintaining version-controlled onboarding materials. If that's in, Box, if that's in ShareDrive, wherever, or SharePoint, wherever your team might be storing things, make sure that you have version control onboarding materials readily available. It's great if you can record your SIVs at each site so that, say you get a new coordinator, the coordinator can watch that and kind of be onboarded a little quicker. And then also make sure that you have like a rapid onboarding checklist for new coordinators. So it's not a panic when you have a turnover coordinator, or, oh gosh, my words, coordinator turnover, and you need to get someone quickly set up at the site. So that's something you should consider with study startup. And then also regular site communication. Sometimes you might be able to catch that a coordinator is leaving a site or something's changing that you can kind of tackle early on. You have to remember, especially with multi-site work, sometimes research coordinators are working on 10, 20 studies. It might take a minute before you're notified that there's been a change in personnel. So best practice, kind of said this, but just be proactive. Staff turnover happens, and sometimes it's just out of our control, so best be thinking about that and preparing for it. Oh, thanks, Anne. Put something in the chat for us. Okay, I'll be kind of quick through this. If you aren't already doing this for your studies, you can do this for a single site or multi-site, but it's best to get a study-specific email. You can do this through the UW service accounts. I have a link in there, but if you type in UW service accounts into wisc.edu, you should be able to find how to get there. But basically, you can make a study-specific email address. And so Theresa and I do this anytime we are the clinical coordinating center. We'll create a study website or, study email address so that sites know that they can just email that and get Theresa and I. It's really helpful to just keep all of your site communications within one central place rather than having to worry about folders. You can give multiple team members access to this email. Just, make sure that's something short and sweet and not your full long study title name. And then I would say try to keep this separate from any email address that participants might be emailing for interest of your trial, just because that kind of could muddy it. And then potentially you might have a lot of people then accessing this email and communications might get missed. So potentially have one for your participants and maybe one for your lead study team, or your CCC. And then also designate a point of contact at each site. It's just going to be so much easier than having to remember to include 5 people, especially if it's just a quick question that you have for them. Okay, so communication is key. So I have a couple of slides on communication. Make sure that you're holding regular coordinator and study staff team meetings. Use these monthly meetings to check in with the sites. You can also do one-on-one site meetings as well, depending on how your study is built. But these connections are really your chance to build rapport with the study teams. You're not going to see them that much, but if you can use this face-to-face or Zoom time to really build that rapport, you're going to be able to communicate better with them. They're going to come to you with potential issues quicker. So just can't stress enough how important these regular meetings are with study teams and site team members. Also, so during these calls, you can discuss common challenges, enrollment questions, if there's any deviations, information that needs to get shared, and then also gather feedback. We might be the experts of what's happening in Wisconsin and specifically at UW, but other institutions operate very differently. They might have local barriers, challenges that their participants are experiencing. maybe the initial plan of a software we planned on using is just not working out at their system or at their health system. So it's really important that you're gathering feedback from study team members because they're the ones on the ground doing the work, and they're going to be able to give you real-time information on what's not working so that you don't have to wait 3 months to finally hear this information that X isn't working, and now you need to submit a protocol change to change something or find a new software. So can't stress how important those meetings are. And then also just want to point out that PIs should be actively engaging sites and site PIs. You shouldn't be delegating information you shouldn't be delegating to your program managers to have those meetings. PIs really should be engaged. And then you should also be finding a great communication channel for PIs as well. That works for everyone. Okay, so I kind of mentioned, I think, some of this, but have brief one-on-one check-ins for team members who weren't able to join the calls. Sometimes that face-to-face is important rather than just sending information in an email. There are going to be cases where that email might just be more efficient. And really prioritize site engagement. Create that two-way communication, build trust. That's going to help build your momentum, and people want to then enroll for your trial. Then the last point is to recognize and celebrate success. This really helps with site engagement. I don't think we, in general, in clinical trials, hear how good of work we're doing, or might not get pointed out because we have so many other things that need to be shared during team meetings. But, just sending an email on how great they did this month with hitting their goals, or they recruited 5 more than you anticipated. Sharing that information with the coordinator's site PI to let them know that their coordinator has really been hitting it out of the park. Just anything, those small little details kind of go a long way with site engagement. Okay, Theresa, you're good to go then next. Okay, so I'll be quick on this one, but my colleague Ann Buffington, who's on the call, her and I also work in ICTR's Recruitment and Retention Resource Center, so I feel like I had to quickly touch on some recruitment and retention items related to multi-site, because these are things that Ann and I talk to research teams about quite often, particularly doing multi-site trials. So it's really important that we are talking to our sites about site-specific strategies for recruitment and retention. There are going to be opportunities at different sites that we might not have at UW, and vice versa, that we should consider allowing as a method. So for instance, we have, I'm sure you are all aware of the UW Research Service mass emails. So sometimes, depending on your trial, that might be an excellent source to really get participants enrolled. Some of those get hundreds of responses based on the study, especially those chicken nuggets and turkey tasting food science ones. But you might get high volume, so you should really talk to the sites and better understand what recruitment approaches work best for their populations too, because we might have regional differences. The trial that I worked on with Rebecca, we were recruiting northern Wisconsin, so they might have very different recruitment efforts than maybe if we're recruiting out of Milwaukee or Madison. And then also centralize your materials, but allow some flexibility at sites. Sometimes teams will put just the lead site's logo, university logo, on the materials. And in North Carolina, that's not going to mean anything. A University of Wisconsin might not mean anything, but having that local institutional logo could be what builds trust with that person. And then last, just make sure you're tracking and monitoring recruitment and using logs, having metrics and check-ins just to better identify any barriers. Theresa, I might quickly go through this one just for the sake of time, but just wanted you all to be aware that Theresa and I can help you get connected with a clinical research network. Clinical research networks are basically structured partnerships of multiple research sites, and these could be academic medical centers, health systems, some of their other affiliates that they work with, but it's to collaborate to run studies more efficiently. They typically have unified systems, so that's, as on the slide says, for training, data collection, oversight, quality control. So you get that standardization built in with the clinical research network. You're good to go to the next one. So we have access here at UW to the Trial Innovation Network. This is a NIH established clinical research network. So on this chart, the blue shows that we have about 60 hubs that are made of academic medical centers across the US and their affiliates, so those could be their health systems. And through the Trial Innovation Network, you can actually implement your trials and have access to additional sites. So that could increase your recruitment total. You're able to recruit a little faster because you have more sites. And you could have more various types of participants due to their regional locations. They also have the Trial Innovation Centers, also called TICs. They're focused on operations, operational innovation and quality. So Duke, Vanderbilt, Utah, and Johns Hopkins and Tufts, I believe, are all the TICs. So they really help you kind of operationalize your innovation. And then we have a National Recruitment and Innovation Center that's housed out of Vanderbilt that you would have access through that, kind of similar to what Ann and I offer more locally. If you are interested in using a clinical research network for your trial, the TIN typically likes studies that are at least 3 institutions that have an innovative approach and that are looking to collaborate across the CTSAs, which is the Clinical Translational Science Award program that those 60-ish hubs are funded through. So you're good to go. Sorry, I'm trying to kind of get through this just so we have time for questions. If you do use the or work with the Trial Innovation Network, I just want to point out it can be a long process. It's not something that's done very quickly. You have kind of a multiple steps to go through. So it can take about 7 months from working with Theresa and I to get you submitted to the TIN all the way through trial implementation if that's the route you're taking. So, okay, quickly get through some trainings that are very exciting that are coming up. If you want to go to the next page. So currently, if you are a PI and a program or project manager, currently the Trial Innovation Network is providing a training sometime this spring. I think maybe it was April, Theresa, I think they said. But you can apply now for it, but they're looking for PI and project manager, program manager dyads. And it's a cohort-based program designed to equip investigators and project managers with the skills necessary to lead multi-site clinical trials. So I think they're typically looking for people that are newer to multi-site, but they have an application form, which is linked here, that you can apply to. Theresa and I tried by last time, but I think they're looking for dyads and that are a little bit newer to multi-site. But these are some of the topics that you can cover, and their website talks a little bit about that too. If you want to go to the next one. This is a whole list of trainings that might be of interest if you're doing multi-site work. There's also an upcoming Clinical Trial Institute. It has a talk on UROC if that's new to you. We'll have another community of practice discussion with Dr. Adam Gepner April 15th, and he's going to be talking about multi-site trials from the PI perspective, which is different than obviously Theresa and I can give you. And then we have a bunch of past clinical trial community of practice webinars that are applicable to multi-site work as well. So, okay. If you want to keep going to the next one. Sorry, guys, I talked too long. So this, I just want to point out quickly that Theresa, myself, and then Dr. Nasia Safdar we make up ICTR's multi-site research support service. So we offer a consultation service, and we're happy to work with you whenever you have questions. If you need assistance with, figuring out your SIVs, we're really to help at any aspect in development of your grant through, closeout. If you have a question, we're here to help. For the multi-site research management service, we can act as your clinical, Theresa, if you want to go down to, I think. Yes. If you needed assistance with the clinical coordinating center, Theresa and I can act as your clinical coordinating center. You would be working with us, and we have some fees associated with this service, but we can help. Basically, we would offer project management to the non-UW sites. We're slightly different than some other CCCs in the fact that we do require that there is a lead site here at UW. So you can visit our website, which I can put in the chat in a second. We have kind of a more in-depth list of all the services that we provide. But yeah, we can help with that. Sorry, I went over my time. Okay, lots of information. Apologies for running through that. I guess, does anyone have any questions or any other questions, especially for Hillary? Oh, perfect. Hillary just pointed out the IRB, they have a Reliant team member on the IRB office hours. So you can go there and ask some more questions.
Okay, I don't know. Any questions? Any last things you want to ask us before we close out the call today?
Yeah, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy, like I said, we're happy to help you wherever you are in the process with our consultation service, and that's free. So feel free to email us.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap up today. A reminder, I'll send out everything with the links, and I will also send out this recording, so you'll have that. And thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.